Today, I'd like to talk about one of the toughest phone calls I had to make during my psychiatry training, and it was to a patient's family member. So today I want to talk about that phone call, and many others I had just like it, because it certainly helps illustrate the many frustrations that families have when their loved ones are getting recurrently psychiatrically hospitalized, going through mental health crises, and the families just feel helpless and powerless in helping them. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Robert, a board-certified psychiatrist, and here I like to make educational videos on mental health topics. If you like today's video, please like and subscribe, certainly helps out, and I hope you check out my future videos as well. So here I am at the end of my second year of residency. It's 3 a.m. I've been seeing patients all day, all night. I've been spending the last hour and a half just catching up on my medical record notes and wrapping up, the relief of just signing the final note, sending a final email, and being done for the time being. I clip off my pager, put it next to the nightstand in the call room, lay down in the call room bed, and I've tracked for scientific purposes. I made the experiment of laying in the patient bed once, trying one of those out when they were empty, and the call room bed is significantly less comfortable. It's almost like they designed them not to be compatible with sleep, so you never actually doze off to sleep and are always vigilant to the pager. So I finally get to lay down in the bed, close my eyes, and it almost seems too good to be true to have this momentary peace. Well, it turns out it is too good to be true. As soon as I close my eyes, a moment later, pager goes beep, beep, beep. I think I'd be triggered even today if I heard that beep. Then I flip on the light, silence the pager, and read what it says. Of course, it reads ED, emergency department, 36-year-old female, suspected mania, psych eval requested. So I accept the reality of it, put on my pager, grab my notes, and I head down to the emergency department to see this new patient. So at the academic center where I did my psychiatry residency, right in the center of the emergency department are these rooms called the psych pods. They're isolated from the rest of the emergency department right there in the center with their own nursing staff, and at times security is housed there as well to kind of keep an eye on things if they do get a little bit rowdy. And it's basically 5 rooms in the hallway where patients are held, especially if they're having a psychiatric emergency, a mental health emergency. There's always this tension of all chaos breaking loose at any potential moment, especially at 3 a.m. So I make my way down there, I enter the psych pod, and I see that the nurses look relieved to see me. No matter what kind of doctor you are, if you're entering a unit and you see that the nurses are relieved to see you, oh boy, that's not a good sign. So the nurses point me to her room, but before entering, before coming down to the ED, I reviewed her chart, of course, and I noticed that she'd been admitted to the psychiatric hospital 3 times in the past 3 months, with some other admissions sprinkled in prior to them. And each time her urine drug screen was negative, her behavior was very erratic, and she would get better after the admission and then deteriorate with her mental health. So I was pretty confident what the diagnosis was. This was not a mystery, a diagnostic mystery. She had bipolar disorder, and she was coming in for recurrent episodes of mania. So I enter the room, which is bare bones. It's stripped of everything, as all the psych pod rooms are, to keep patients from engaging in self-harm. And there's just this gurney in the center. I see this tall, thin woman. Her hair kind of burnt, disheveled. She's wearing a hospital gown. And she's just pacing back and forth behind the gurney. So of course, first thing I do is just introduce myself, let her know who I am, and she just kind of stares at me suspiciously a little bit, darting back and forth quite a lot in the room. And as I typically do when I first meet someone in the hospital in this kind of situation, I ask them, well, can you tell me what's your understanding of why you're here in the hospital? That open-ended question allows for the patient to kind of fill you in their own way of what's their understanding of why they're there, and that will tell you a lot about their mental state. She kind of just locks eyes with me suddenly, and she starts answering. I'm here because of the organization, and I have the secrets to keep them safe, and they want to keep me safe, and they're after me and my thoughts, and I can think them before they can think them, and they see them before I can see them. It just keeps going, probably even faster than I just said it. And so I definitely take note of that, right? She's at 3 a.m., very wired, very awake. Her speech is very what we call pressured, so very quick. Words are blurring together. Her thought process is very tangential. There's some paranoia there. It's not making much sense. I also read in the paramedics note that she was brought in because she was live streaming on Facebook Live, her basically setting her apartment on fire to ward it off of the demons, get rid of evidence, things like that, and not making much sense. Of course, her family noticed this, called 911, and she was brought in. So all of this in line with a severe manic episode from bipolar disorder. But of course, even though her answers aren't making much sense, writing down these quotes of what she's saying definitely builds the argument for her involuntary hospitalization for monitoring. As I'm asking about her family history, of course, she tells me her father's Barack Obama, mother's Mariah Carey, so some pretty high power parents there. Psychiatric term for that would be grandiosity. She alternates between doing lunges and jumping jacks as we're chatting. She has no recollection of trying to set her apartment on fire. And of course, most importantly, with all of this is reduced insight. And that's a key factor here. She doesn't have the insight, the ability to be aware that she's not acting in ways that she normally does or thinking in ways that she normally does. To her, everything seems a-okay, and it's everyone else that is off. So she has no ability to recognize just how dangerous her behavior is. So after writing down some more memorable quotes from her, I leave the room and I head to the nursing station where I can get a little bit of peace and quiet and call her emergency contact. Of course, it being 4 a.m., I'm not expecting anybody to answer, but just on the second ring, someone picks up. You can tell it's a man's voice, an older man. Immediately, the moment that he hears that I'm a doctor at the University of Chicago, a psychiatrist nonetheless, I can hear his voice wake up, and he's very eager to gain some information from me. So I speak with the father, I kind of get his history of his daughter kind of starting to struggle with mental health a couple of years prior. First, it started with a little bit of depression after having her first child. She now has a son who's 4 years old, and he's basically being cared for by him and his wife. So her parents, kids' grandparents are caring for him because Tanya, what I'll call this patient, she's just been unable to do it because of her mental health, because of these recurrent admissions to hospitals, her very dangerous behavior in between admissions. All of that is leading for this child to have an unsafe place to live. So he's staying with the grandparents. And he expresses to me just the frustration that they've had of this nonstop cycle of her kind of getting back to her normal self after these hospitalizations, because she's usually hospitalized, started on mood stabilizers, some antipsychotics, and things do get better. She does get back to her regular self, recognizes that, something off happened. Her memory of exactly what she did during these manic episodes is never fully recovered, not very clear, but she is able to sort of get back to some semblance of life. But then she stops the medications. She has no follow-up scheduled, and so the cycle repeats a few months later. And at this point, at 4 a.m., nothing strikes me about this conversation. So I've had this conversation dozens of times at this point with various family members of people with severe mental illness who are just getting recurrently admitted, and there aren't the resources, there isn't the education about this condition, and the ability to get regular follow-up. And even in the communities themselves, I've come to learn there's a lot of mistrust about the healthcare system in general and about mental health in particular. So people are very reluctant to see a psychiatrist, a therapist, take any medication for their mental health. And unfortunately, in severe mental illness, this comes up as recurrent just hospitalizations, loss of job, loss of family, and oftentimes that does eventually lead to homelessness. For whatever reason, this time around, it really struck me, even though I had this conversation before with people on the phone, family members, that, my goodness, years her life has been disrupted. She could lose her life from this condition, and yet the family and likely the patient, they don't have a clear understanding. Nobody's taken the time to sit down with them and explain what this condition is. What are some of the treatment options? What sort of resources are really, really essential for them to have in between these hospital stays to have any semblance of a chance at normal life? And her poor child, this 4-year-old as well, probably has no idea what's happening with his mom and might grow up not really having a full understanding of what's been affecting her. And that's certainly going to have repercussions on his life, his mental health. So recognizing that, kind of explained to him, bipolar disorder is a severe brain condition, a mental health condition where people's perception of reality, their ability to process information can get very disrupted. They can have these periods of mania where they don't need to sleep. Their behavior becomes very erratic. Their ability to interpret what's real, what's not can be disrupted, and they can put themselves in very dangerous situations. And these can be interrupted by periods of almost normal functioning at times, which can be very, very confusing for people. And also periods of severe depression as well, where people really struggle with their mental health, with motivation, going out and doing things, eating, energy, being engaged in life, and even symptoms of psychosis can pop up during those periods as well. For many people with bipolar disorder, I also explained to them, having a psychiatrist that you see regularly is crucial, as well as a therapist, having a support system, having people who can pick up on the warning signs of when mania is coming up or depression starting to come around as well. It really struck me, I think, the following day too, that this shouldn't be something that a psychiatrist does at 4 a.m. with a family. This should be standard of care where people have access to seeing a mental health provider and having these family sessions for cases of severe mental illness like this. So at the end of our conversation, I have to run at this point. Pager's going off. I have to see other patients. I can't stay on the phone forever. Something that really kind of, I think, makes this case stick out in my mind is the father sort of stopped, and I think his wife, so the patient's mother, took over the phone. And she said to me, "Dr. Radishak, thank you for speaking to us. Thank you for telling us about this. We'll pray for you in church this weekend." And that really sort of caught me off guard. I could tell that they were very genuinely thankful and appreciative of that information. And I was just sitting there struck at 4 a.m. that, my goodness, like, it can't be that I'm the first one telling them this. I also felt bad for the whole situation too, because I knew what was going to play out. I knew that Tanya was going to get psychiatrically hospitalized, probably forced to be put on a mood stabilizer of some sort. Her symptoms would improve, her insight would come back, she would be sleeping again, acting fairly rationally again, and then she'd be discharged, probably maybe even too soon if her insurance runs out too quickly. And she'd likely also be sent off to a psychiatric hospital that probably didn't have the highest standards of care, this being the south side of Chicago. It was kind of a toss-up whether you'd go to a place that, oh, you'll get good care there. But if you go to this hospital, ooh, best of luck to you. And I knew that when she was discharged, she probably would not be plugged in with a psychiatrist, a therapist. Her ability to access care would be limited. Her willingness to engage in healthcare would also be limited. And the cycle would probably play out again a few months later. Unfortunately for Tanya and all too many patients with similar stories, she would just become part of that regular list that we see of frequent flyers with psychosis or mania to the emergency department, going through the cycle of getting hospitalized only for long enough that their insurance covers the stay, discharged without many resources, admitted again a few months later, gradually moving towards homelessness. Of course, I recount this story to kind of illustrate some of the faults in the system and kind of share with you guys one of the main issues I've seen recurrently play out of these kind of cycles of admission, discharge, lack of resources, lack of support. But of course, I don't have the answer for how to solve that. Certainly having more well-funded, more well-equipped psychiatric hospitals to deal with the need of stabilizing people in these mental health emergencies and that are able to provide you with outpatient care afterwards. Partial hospitalization programs are more readily available to people, especially if they're underinsured. Reducing the mental health stigma, all of these things would certainly help, but easier said than done. I think the recurrent frustrations about just mental health education out there as well, that's been one of the inspirations for myself to start this channel, to kind of provide a psychiatrist's perspective on mental health topics, experiences, and hopefully share that, interest you guys in that. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think in the comments about this story. Are you also interested in me sharing more stories from psychiatry residency, which is a very exciting period, very high intensity, where you see the full spectrum of mental health symptoms, mental health conditions. And if you like today's video, please like and subscribe. It goes a long way. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you back next week for another episode of Shrink Talk with Dr. Robert. Thanks.